Hey everyone, thank you for joining me today. We are going to be discussing what happens to our body when we live a primarily sedentary lifestyle. This can be if you're working in an office setting. This can be if you're working remote at a desk. There are many reasons that people are living a more sedentary lifestyle these days. And what we're going to be doing today is identifying what happens to our body over time while we work these jobs and where our major risk factors are and what that can lead to long term. So we are going to use my diagram. We're going to call this Bob. So this is Bob. He works an office job, okay, primarily. He does a lot of time sitting at a desk and working at a computer in front of him. So what we're going to do first is look at Bob on day one, okay? He's over here. He's got a nice seated position. But let's look over at Bob day 700. Bob day 700 ain't looking too good. So what has happened between day 1 and day 700 is that Bob's been sitting in this fixed position. And what's happened over time is that his hip flexors and his front part of his body have gotten very tight because they're very used to sitting in this position over long periods of time, and they haven't really stretched or extended as much as they need to in order to stay elongated. So now we have Bob over here who now has very tight hips. And what that has done is actually made his pelvis tilt forward into what we call an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, when that happens, our lower back, as you can see over here, starts to tighten because that is also in a shortened position, which can therefore, over time, lead to symptoms of chronic back pain, which is actually one of the main reasons that people miss days of work throughout the year. If we also look at Bob over here, he's been sitting on his booty for a little while, so now we haven't been using those muscles quite as much. And what's going to happen to Bob after a long period of time of not using those muscles as much is those gluteus maximus muscles are going to start to weaken. And when those weaken, they also are not going to be able to properly stabilize the hips. And when we can't properly stabilize the hips, a lot of things begin to happen after that. We might experience things like knee pain. We might experience things like problems around our ankles because those hips are the center of our body, and when they are not stable, it starts to affect other parts of our body that are interconnected with that. Now, not only has Bob become pretty tight in his hips, his lower back, and weak in his bottom, but he's also started to get a very weak core from the position that he's been sitting in and not sitting as upright as he maybe should have been. He's also been doing a lot of work in front of him at the computer. This is over time making his chest become much more tight. And when his chest becomes much more tight, his back actually begins to weaken, and that's when we get that rounding in the back behind him. As that begins to happen, Bob's head is moving forward, and his neck, his trapezius muscles by his neck are starting to elongate and move into a forward position. And when that happens, we can start to experience symptoms of chronic neck pain, which can also be quite a struggle for your life moving forward. Now, what Bob really needs to do is start stretching his chest rather than his neck because it's already in an elongated position, but stretching his chest to open it up and become more comfortable, stretching those hip flexors, stretching that lower back, working the gluteus maximus to stabilize the hips, and also working that core to help relieve some of that pain that's happening in his lower back and be able to hold himself up a little bit more steady. And that's something that Bob's going to have to work at over a long period of time as well, because if you think about it in comparison, imagine how much time Bob has spent sitting in this position, which is great because our bodies adapt in this way to make us as good as possible at the things that we do throughout our life. It wants us to be as good as it can be, wants us to be as good as we can be at the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. However, over time, it's going to make Bob very uncomfortable, and standing, especially after this position, is going to make him also very uncomfortable. So this is something that we need to work at day in, day out, do something to move those muscles, to stretch those muscles in order for Bob to live a happy and healthy lifestyle. It's also going to help him increase his satisfaction at work, because when we're experiencing chronic pain and we're doing a repetitive job throughout the day and we're not comfortable, it's going to reduce our job satisfaction. It's going to reduce the amount of stress or the amount of endorphins that we're feeling or the happiness that we're feeling. So it's really important to get up and move and take care of ourselves so that we're happy and healthy, not only at work, but also outside of work in our everyday lives. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope that helped, and try to get out there and take care of yourselves as best as you can, at least a few days a week, because it will add up and it will make a huge difference.